Hi, this is Professor Powers, and we're going to walk through our first deck, topic one, uh, for information introduction in computer information systems. So this is really is focused on providing an overview. Our learning objective is, as we described here, define an information system by identifying the major components, and also talk about a little bit of the history of information systems. So, as we look at this question of information technology, um, the opening question is, is information technology worth the time and the cost? For organizations, the investment in information technology represents a pretty significant investment on behalf of the company. So there's real recognition or a real desire to be able to articulate, what is the value proposition associated with information technology. Some of the questions that that get asked, as at the outset, can the intended audience use technology effectively? Or maybe to state it in another way, can if you use a computer, if you add a computer into a particular situation, do things automatically get better? And the answer is there's no absolute guarantee. And I think what we'll see as we go through this course is that the use of information technology can provide significant advantages for companies or organizations. However, simply adding a computer into a situation may not necessarily provide the results that maybe initially have been anticipated. So another question is, the idea of the context of information. Words can mean many things. So in the computer world, we talk about Apple. Apple is a company that makes computers and um, technology, but there's also the concept of an apple as a fruit. So, there's a context associated with with information. It really needs to be identified. A computer, in and of itself, does not. I mean, if you put Apple, there's nothing in the computer itself that understands intrinsically that an apple is, it's a company versus a fruit. So, where does information come from? Do you trust the source of the information? If it's on the internet, then it must be true. One of the big things we're seeing, I mean, this is really, I think, comes to the heart of the way we use information technology these days, is the volumes of information, the volume of data that we are capable of dealing with through the use of computers is very significant. And I think there's been, maybe from a long time back, kind of an intrinsic trust that, okay, if it comes out of a computer, it must be correct. However, that's not necessarily true. All right, so really understanding data, and we'll be talking about that um, downstream in this course. But what happens is information, where it comes from, the validity of it, where did it come from, how was it processed, and this idea of things that are on the internet, more than anything, more than ever. This question of the validation, verification of data is very, very significant. I needed the information to make a decision yesterday. All right, the timeliness of information. Uh, Information technology is a tremendous accelerator. So what will happen is, if you leverage computer technology and process large amounts of information and develop uh, reports that can be used to help make a good decision. Speed in decision making is a critical factor. You want to be able to make uh, decisions quickly, but you also need the thing that also needs to be taken into consideration. You also need to make a decision correctly. So it's not just simply, speed in and of itself is one attribute, but correct decisions are another factor. So one of the things that we'll talk about over the course of this term around information technology is, this idea of information technology being able to accelerate decision making is not necessarily and automatically a good thing. All right. So what will happen is there's actually some situations where, maybe taking some time and being able to think things through more clearly. There's clearly some advantages within that. So we'll be talking about that over the course of the term. This idea of terabytes of information. Here's the terabytes of information. Hope it helps. Uh, we swim in an ocean of data, more so now than at any point in human history. So, it used to be a terabyte of data was, you know, companies, large corporate organizations would spend years and years and years to generate a terabyte of data. Now, organizations can generate a terabyte, in the course of a business of a day. So the importance of being able to organize this stuff, analyze this stuff, be able to make decisions with it is pretty important. Now, the one good thing is that information technology does the one thing it does well, probably does better than anything else, is it enables you to go through larger and larger amounts of data. And we'll see. Actually, one of the things we've been seeing is that the amounts of data that get processed on an ongoing basis. So if we look at organizations like Google and we think about how much information there is currently available on the internet, some of the tools and techniques that Google uses to be able to harness all of this capability that's in this ocean of data is pretty interesting stuff. So we'll be talking about that at points during the semester. And then finally, the question really is IT simply cool, or does it really help solve problems and make better decisions? And the answer is really kind of the objective of this course, but there is a cool aspect to it, and it does solve problems, and it can allow for better decisions to be made. However, none of this stuff is automatic, so it's a tool like anything else. Uh, so what ends up happening is the outcome of the implementation of technology is not always guaranteed to be good. All right, and when we talk around different, as we'll talk about different kinds of technology, a lot of this stuff will be, the idea of how complicated some of this stuff actually is or can be. So there's two videos here. I would suggest you go. You can actually follow the links here, and they are on YouTube. First one is this kind of the definition of what is an information system. There are 5 components. We're going to be talking about that in a minute, but there's a first video from Dan Bourgeois describes really the 5, what he calls out as the 5 components of an information system. And then there's I guess a follow-on here with Knowledge Horizons also in a similar fashion, how those components actually get used in an organization. So when defining an information system, all right, there's really there's 5 components. So when we talk, when we look at the term information system, it's made up of parts. It's a system. It's a collection of different things that all kind of work together. And if you look at it, you can break this stuff up into really 5 pieces. All right, so the 5 essential pieces, and we're going to be talking over the next few weeks. We're going to be walking through this a component at a time. So the first component is hardware, which is basically the equipment, physical, touchable equipment that is used in part of computing. Next component is software, which is the instructions, programs that get used, that get run on the hardware to perform a task. The third piece is data, which is really the facts and information, basically the amount of stuff that's we've collected, facts and information, which has been gathered, analyzed, processed, transformed so to be uh, able to be processed by the combinations of hardware and software to ultimately come up with results. So it's really when we think of the technology side of of an information system, it's really those three: hardware, software, and data. So that's kind of the core foundation. We talk here about network communications. It's You could argue that is a that can be considered a component in its own right, but it's really that if you look at that, that's actually kind of a combination of hardware and software. So it's it falls into both those categories. Um, but the softer things, actually, when we talk about software, but the things involving um, people and processes are the other two elements of an information system. So obviously, the people, who are the users who are responsible for gathering the information, processing, and then working with the results, whatever whatever is generated through an information system. That's people. And then processes is really is defined as a series of tasks um, which have a expected outcome. And what where processes fit in with this is that you can use information technology to help streamline a process and to accelerate a process and to make a process run smoother and much more efficiently. So you end up taking a combination of people and processes in an organization, combining that with information system, and the data to ultimately give you really what we're describing here is an overall information system. Now, brief comments on the kind of the history. So, computers have been around. General purpose computing really kind of came to the fore post World War II in the 1950s. First big major company in that space was IBM. So IBM, their uh, main product was we call the mainframe computer, very large. From in comparison to what we run now, your iPhone has more capability than some of the earlier mainframes. But these were very large systems that could, basically take large amounts of data in, process it, and generate large amounts of output, like forms and reports, and were really used by companies as kind of a central um, function to be able to process information within the organization. So you ended up having, in the mainframe era, the thing that categorized that would be there was one computer per company. All right. And that was really kind of the dominant style through, starting in the 50s through the 60s into the 70s and also into the 80s. So that's an ongoing, that was the majority of organizations had that. Um, in the 70s, probably like mid 70s, there was kind of a new industry started up around what they called this personal computer, which is basically a very small computer, whereas opposed to a mainframe is a very large, um, you know, basically fills several rooms. A PC was designed to be in effect, a personal computer, a computer that an individual person would use, um, and to do work. And the history of that, as I said, started in the mid 70s. So it was a lot of hobbyists, a lot of like smaller kinds of people doing things. So this was kind of the early days of Microsoft and Apple. So this is where Bill Gates and Steve Jobs cut their teeth. And it was sort of a very fragmented, kind of a hobbyist-driven market up until like the early '80s. And when IBM actually came out with what they called the IBM PC, which is really the platform that really kind of changed everything. All right, so the IBM PC was the first, wasn't the first PC, but it was the one that really kind of set the standard, and every PCs we see these days really kind of trace their lineage back to the IBM PC. All right, so that was the idea around the PC revolution is we go from one PC per company to or one computer per company to one computer on per desk. All right. Uh, Move into like the 90s, and when the next evolution of this stuff was really kind of combining a mainframe and a PC. So this idea of what we call client server computing, where is really where you have people using the PC on the desks as a as a kind of a workstation, local workstation, but then you communicate with the mainframe as a kind of a central machine. So that's what client server is. The World Wide Web is it is really it's used interchangeably with the internet, but it's really kind of its own thing. It runs on top of the internet, but was actually developed using a technology that was really came into play in like the early 90s. So what we think of as the internet is probably about maybe 25 years old. All right, from the World Wide Web and electronic commerce. So but the internet itself actually goes back to the 60s. But at that point it was really focused on military and universities were the only places that really had it. So you saw this, and it really, if you think about it, was client server. So the same basic mechanics of a client server model is replicated in the World Wide Web. So basically, you have a web server and you have a web client, a browser. So it works kind of the same way, except that it leverages the internet and kind of broader networking. Web 2.0 is really what we think of as the next evolution of the web. So the web is really, which is, as we went from kind of very simple types of web pages to things like what we see now with, like Amazon, it's probably the best example, of kind of the sophistication of, the websites we see now. That's really what is part and parcel of Web 2.0, being able to do all sorts of very active and dynamic. The first web pages that were out there were if you look at videos of like some of the original websites, they were pretty, in modern terms, they're pretty cheesy. But now very colorful, very sophisticated types of things, and that really kind of came out with Web 2.0. Now where we stand today, there's really kind of two drivers in this what we're terming the post PC world. So one is cloud computing. Okay, so cloud computing is a form of computing where the systems are all virtualized, so and accessible across the internet. So it's a combination of you take a combination of virtualized hardware. So basically, you convert a PC so it can actually run as a program inside of another machine. So and then access it on the internet. That's cloud computing. We'll be talking about cloud computing, in some depth. And then mobile. So mobile is the form of mobile is it probably has been around about 10 years now. So usually you can date kind of the mass acceptance or kind of the real direction around that with the introduction of the iPhone, which was in 2007. So in many ways, if you look at the IBM PC or the PC revolution, which was really IBM kind of establishing what the standard, what a standard PC would look like and how it would operate, and then you can take a parallel with what Apple did with the iPhone, and kind of creating this whole world of mobile devices and applications. So that's really the modern, what we consider right now, the modern forms of computing, which are still evolving even as we speak. All right, so it's not like we've reached any endpoint at all. All right. So, in kind of our summary point on this is, once again, information technology trends are, have impacted the world and will continue to impact the world, and how, in many, many, many ways. All right, so there's a set of 7 questions. You can take a look at these, so the 5 components are uh, hardware, software, data, people and process. Uh, Examples of information systems hardware would be things like a PC, a mainframe, an iPhone would be three. Application software is programs that are run that provide a particular function or service. Roles people play, they're really the consumers of information systems. They are basically, information systems are tools that people use to do stuff. All right. We talked about a process. Process is a series of tasks designed to operate in such a fashion so it comes up with a expected outcome. The information systems, the evolution of this stuff. The way I always like to describe this would be, mainframe was, one computer per company. PCs were one computer per desk, and post PC is one computer, or at least one computer per pocket. All right. In the post PC world, we are in kind of a post PC world. Post PC world does not mean the PC goes away. But however, the PC was a dominant platform for a very long period of time. So the post PC world means that it's not the only thing. So mobility and mobile platforms and phones and really computers as consumer devices are relatively new. But those are all the different kinds of things that make up what we can refer to as a post PC world. All right, so that's about it for chapter one. Thanks.